Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. Our core values include I am, I can, and I will. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Today we have Dr. Serena Satcher. She's a graduate of Meharry Medical College. She holds certifications in integrative and functional medicine. She's also board certified in sports medicine. She has served on the faculty of several universities, and her declared mission is, and I'm quoting now, is to be a medical detective, a different kind of doctor who thinks outside of the box and inspires and empowers people to heal themselves. Dr. Satcher, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Middleton.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been excited about talking with you because of your interest in functional medicine, not your interest, but your work in functional and integrative medicine. We'll dig deeper into that in a moment, but I've said a few things about your background, but my guests will want to know more about you, like where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up all over the place. So I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, and then went to elementary school in Hampton, Virginia, on the campus of Hampton Institute. And then I went to high school in Denmark, South Carolina. But in between that, my family lived in East Africa because my dad worked for USAID. And we were there in the 70s when Idi Amin was in power, and we were only living there for about 6 months because Idi Amin started kind of killing folks, so we had to leave. But I graduated from high school in Denmark, South Carolina, and then I went to undergraduate in Tennessee, and then medical school in Tennessee. And I've lived in Chicago for 20 years after that. And now I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I left out that my dad went to graduate school in Oregon. So I lived there for several years too, as a child. Okay. Yeah, so I've lived East Coast, West Coast, overseas. Yes. Yeah.
Well, you've been all over. And when I saw that you went to high school in South Carolina as a South Carolinian, I just perked up because, oh, she's a homegirl of mine. So
yeah,
so happy to get to know you. So now, what attracted you to the medical arts?
Yeah, so I have an uncle that's a medical doctor, but I was always interested in math and science. And when I was in grade school, I was exposed to, in that time, it was like you would see women on TV as nurses. Because I think, wasn't Diane Carroll a nurse on one of the shows
she was
on?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's probably where I kind of picked up the nurse thing. So I remember talking to my parents about it when I was in elementary school, and my dad was like, well, you could be a doctor if you wanted to. So in high school, I was going back and forth between like biomedical engineering and medicine, and it ended up on medicine. So yeah.
So you were one of those precocious students, one of these smart people. But look, okay, I'll leave that one alone. But the Possibility Action Network is also just excited about talking with people who have faced obstacles and triumphing over them. So I'm not making any assumptions about you, but what have you learned about the resiliency of the human spirit from your time, in college and then medical school, and then your residency at a few medical colleges? What did you learn about resiliency of the human spirit?
Well, I'll start with before that. So living in East Africa when I was 7, 8 years old, and the men that were working at our house lived in the villages. So we got to go out to the villages and see how the regular people were living. And they were actually living in huts, but the huts were fortified, like they had tin roofs, but it was completely different from what I was used to seeing in the States. So, and also like they took care of themselves from the land, and they had food from the land. So they were not seeing doctors, like if they got sick, they were taking care of themselves. They had like a root doctor, they had, the traditional doctors in their community. And they were fermenting food. So I got to see all that at 8 years old. I also had friends in my school who were from different countries and who had different traditions. So that was kind of like, my baseline. So I had a different way of thinking when I came back to the States, different from other kids.
Yeah.
And I would say, through my training, I was always interested in like rural medicine, how they were doing medicine, or how people were staying well in other countries and using other resources other than medical doctors. And my grandmother, well, both of my grandmothers were well versed in, using herbs from the woods, using natural things. This is what's in the Black community. We have that heritage that was brought from Africa. In fact, many of the plants and herbs that people have documented, like in the Southeast, that are quote unquote growing wild, were actually brought here by slaves and not cultivated, but, out there in the woods, for people to use that knew how to identify the plants. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about those therapies because, but just to say, let you know, when I was a kid, I grew up, as I said, in the southeastern part of the state, near Charleston, really. And my mother used to send us into the wood to get roots and to make sassafras tea. And that tea was medicinal. And there were other things that they did as well. Perhaps we'll talk more about those in a moment. So I identify with what you're saying. So now many people have asked me, because I've told them that I'm going to have a functional integrative medicine medical doctor on the show with me today. And they say, well, what is functional medicine? So I put that question to you. How would you explain to someone who is not initiated, who is not a medical person, this field we call functional medicine?
Yeah, so when I'm telling people, if I have to give like a quick, answer, I say it's nutritional biochemistry, and you've got like some genomics thrown in. So we kind of recognize the influence of genomics, which is not the same as genetics, but it's looking at some of the information that we get in genetics and how our nutrition interacts with our genetics, because it's individual for everybody.
I see.
And we also see a lot of importance in the mental, emotional, spiritual, and how that influences our health. In fact, we have a matrix diagram that we use that has the mental, emotional, spiritual at the center of the health. It influences all the systems, coordinates all the systems, controls all the systems.
Okay. So if you were talking with a patient who has, let's say the patient is about 60 years of age, or older, and they've only seen traditional doctors, and let's identify the person's background as an allopathic doctor. That's all this doctor knows. How would you explain to this patient the difference between functional medicine and integrative medicine, and let's say allopathic medicine that her or his traditional doctor follows?
Yeah, so, I can explain it to people, but it's really hard for them to conceive until they actually participate with it, because it's a process. But we look at what's happened to the person from even before they were born until now. And I call myself a medical detective because I'm able to look at that timeline and see what may have influenced a person's health to get them to where they are now. And there are different influences. Stress is a huge influencer. And many people, including people in, traditional medicine, don't realize the influence. And I came from the traditional medicine background, or I call it conventional medicine. Was in academics, so I know that whole world. And that's why I say that it's difficult for the patient to envision the process that they're going to go through of like actually listening to their body, putting the food in that their body is calling for, putting the nutrients in, the sleep in, the movement in, addressing their mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, and integrating all that into the whole person, and evolving into a different version of themselves that's more healthy and more well. Because a lot of people, I would say the majority of the people in the United States, think allopathically. So most people, when they talk to me, they want to know what supplement I'm recommending for their hypertension, or what supplement I'm recommending for their diabetes. But I need to look at their history and figure out, when did this problem start? And where was the breakdown? What's been happening to you? What stressors have you had? You see?
I see. So you're interested in the whole person, the whole body, and not just, I have, let's pick, pick disease A. Now give me a drug to treat disease A. I see that. So in terms of your practice in treating people who present with certain symptoms, what have you seen in terms of the regenerative power of the body? What I'm asking is this: we talked about resiliency of the human spirit a moment ago, and I'm also thinking that there's resiliency in the human body as well, that we have tremendous recuperative power. So what have you seen in terms of people recovering from problems?
So, for instance, I worked in a clinic in Virginia where we saw a lot of people with diabetes, and we had a few patients that had diabetes type 1. And you would ordinarily think, well, what can they do about anything? Because they have type 1 diabetes, so their pancreas is completely gone. So in type 1 diabetes, they have to take insulin. And in type 2 diabetes, it's a type of diabetes that's developed later in life, and it's more of a nutritional issue. And so some people with type 2 end up taking insulin, but that's because they burn their pancreas out from the type of nutrition they're eating. But type 1, is the one where we think of more children, and that their pancreas was attacked, and so they have to take insulin to live. So one would think that there's nothing you can do about that because the organ is basically gone and it's not functioning. But I have seen cases where we were able to decrease their dependence on insulin. So what that means is maybe they were taking like 100 units a day, and we were able to decrease the amount of units of insulin that they had to take a day. And that's because the cells in their body were optimized after we work with them. And a lot of times we're able to get people off medications that they've been told that they're never going to be able to get off of. So, that's a case. I've had a patient in the past that had their adrenal glands taken out. And they were told, you got to take all these medications. There's nothing you can do. I think he was on maybe 5 meds, and he just couldn't find that acceptable because he was pretty healthy before this happened to him. He had an illness, and then they had to take his adrenal glands out. Well, I don't want to say they had to take them out, but unfortunately, he went to them before he figured out that he could get functional medicine. So we were able to get him off of all the medications, that's, I believe, except one. And that was medication providing the hormones. Maybe it was two hormones that were providing the hormones that the adrenal glands would have been making.
Mm-hmm.
And this person is now chopping wood. He's, built up his muscle mass.
Wow.
Was diabetic when I first met him, also is not diabetic anymore, like a completely different person, high quality of life now. So, those are cases that seem impossible to traditional medicine, but, the body can be resilient and come back with certain functions, and the person can basically get back to normal and not be as dependent as they thought they were.
That's a huge win. I mean, that's a huge win. I'm a cellular health educator, and in talk with some people, what I've discovered is that when people talk to someone like me, they want like an overnight cure or an overnight reversal of their situation. But if they go to their allopathic doctor, they're more patient. They may wait a year or 2 years or understand that their situation may never reverse. Have you found this, or is it just a fluke on my part that I've talked to some people like
Yeah,
this?
that's the allopathic mindset.
Uh-huh.
So they're expecting a pill for an ill, and when they go to a natural provider, they're expecting a natural pill for an ill.
Mm-hmm.
And, it has to be explained like over and over again that it took them a lifetime in most cases to get to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And usually they've seen multiple doctors, both holistic and conventional or traditional doctors. And that they should at least have some patients that at least 1 or 2 years of working on their health to get to an optimal goal,
Sure.
So yeah, but you have to tell them over and over.
Yeah.
And then you also have to show them sometimes people don't see their progress.
Right.
And so it's important to document what was going on in the beginning and to remind people, hey, your blood sugar was here and now it's normal.
Right.
Now we're working on other things,
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
It takes, if you take a lifetime to fix the problem, it may not disappear overnight. So I'm not sure if you're willing to do this, and I don't want you to practice medicine on me openly. So tell me what you're comfortable with, but I want to share something with you and my audience, whoever's listening, about my health. I live with, and I prefer living with than saying I have. I don't know, it's just me. I live with a muscular issue. The doctors say that it's muscular dystrophy. And through the genetic testing, they've isolated it to limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. Now, my neurologist says that she cannot say that I inherited it, but one of my genes somehow, just misfired or whatever happened. And I have this calpain 3 deficiency. So I guess my question to you is simply this. Are there some, oh, by the way, but I'm treating myself successfully. I mean, I had a short morning on my bike this morning. I did 6 miles. To me, that's a win. There are times when I've done 10 miles. To me, that's a win. I drove from here to Clearwater, Florida recently and felt good afterwards and drove back a couple of days later. So I look at my wins and it's like, I'm winning this fight, So, but anyway, let's go back to my question. There's some problems, I'm sure you would agree, that are stubborn. Are there any hopeless cases in your mind? Are there some, well, gosh, that's not a fair question to ask, but I think you see what I'm getting at. Are there some,
I see what you're, so energetics in the type of medicine I do is very, very important. And what we're seeing in research is that you've probably heard of epigenetics.
Yes.
So your genes may show a determination towards or tendencies towards certain ailments. But then the environment that's created around the cells helps to determine how the cells are going to act and react in real life. So we in conventional and traditional medicine have limitations about the way we think about illness and ailments, right? So our limitations are that in the past, we thought that genetics was like everything, that it determined everything. But now we're seeing there are people that have genes, but then something is switching the genes either off or on. And we don't quite have that figured out yet. But you find out when you talk to people that do energy medicine, and I do some forms of energy medicine in my practice, like neuro-emotional technique. I advocate for meditation, for hypnosis, for different energy therapies. You know, a lot of people in general have probably heard of Reiki, but that's not the only energy medicine technique. Acupuncture is another energy medicine technique. And they're showing in, you know, scientific studies that these things work. It's hard to show that in scientific studies because most of these energy therapies, people know that they're getting them. And so you can't double blind for, like, acupuncture is really tough to blind for that. Although I've seen some studies where they've done it. So, and holistic medicine is difficult to blind for because we use multiple modalities. We don't just use a supplement, which you'll see in studies that they often do. They'll just look at the study and they'll just look at like vitamin C, but they don't change anything else. Because we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at sleep, hormone balance, the mental, emotional, spiritual, movement or exercise. So all these things influence the environment of the cell.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I've seen energy healings that the average person would be very, you know, they'd be scrutinizing it, trying to figure out how did that happen. I mean, and things like you're mentioning, like your illness, I've seen things like that turned around. So I don't have a limitation in my mind. I think that our minds are the limiting factor. And, you know, regardless of what religion you are, you've probably heard of like miracles in the Bible, miracles like in the Quran, you know, and in the Jewish faith, just about all faiths, they have had exhibitions of miracles. And even in the Bible, there are teachings in there or statements that were made by people to show you examples of like how they were actually doing it. Like they were meditating. They were going off in the woods for like 40 days, you know, by themselves and talking to God. And, you know, so there's the quote unquote Jedi mind tricks are reality, you know?
Right. That's awesome. And that's why the Possibility Action Network really exists, because we believe that, you know, anything really is possible. And if you, anyway, I'll leave that there for now. But let me ask you another question. How can people live healthier lives? If you were to, you know, say, okay, there are three things that can produce better health for almost anyone, what would your top three be? And that could be supplementation, whatever you want to list, your top three.
I had to give the top three, I would say some daily practice of meditation. And meditation can be in different forms because there are prayer meditation, you know, because everybody has their different meditation. There's walking meditation. So there's a lot of different forms of meditation. But that would be number one for me. Number two would be nutrition and eating plants, eating things from the earth. I believe that our genetics help us figure out like what types of foods we're supposed to be eating, our genetics, and also our genetics origins. So like I have genetics coming from West Africa. So I need to be looking to West Africa for, and not right now what they're eating, but what historically did they eat? What's the archaeology, what did they eat in the past? Because those are the types of food that are probably going to be best for my system. And then number 3 would be movement. So we all need to be moving our bodies and not be sedentary. Humans are supposed to be in motion. We were at one time running miles a day looking for food. So that's kind of where our genetics live. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Wow, I can't say that I'm surprised that spiritual was number 1, but and I want to probe this a little bit with you, because the word God today has so many different meanings in the world. I mean, there's some people who would invoke God and then do a crime. Some people invoke God back in the day, early 20th century, and did a lynching. So God. So when you say spirit and spiritual, can you tell me more about what you mean?
Yeah, so I'm not talking about necessarily religion, although many religions incorporate spirituality, but I'm talking about spirituality in connecting to the divine within ourselves.
Yes.
So when you're doing meditation, or a meditation-like practice, you're connecting to the divine within yourself. And that divine, even atheists believe in nature or some power within themselves. So it's for everyone.
I find that enormously powerful, Dr. Satcher, of what you just said, because in my own experience, when I recognize my divine nature, my divine heritage, everything else looks different. When I think of God as being someplace else who's ready to send me to hell, things look different in a different way. So that's wonderful. And one of these days, I would love to have you back so that we can probe that more, because you mentioned mental health before, emotional health, even trauma. I think that's a part of some of the things that you've worked on. And would you say that, one spiritual awareness can improve each of those areas? One's experience of trauma, one's experience of depression, and other forms of mental stress. What would you say to that? That spirituality is actually can be therapeutic.
Oh yeah. So we didn't talk about it, but I worked in the VA in a special unit called the WRIISC, War-Related Illness and Injury Services, War-Related Services Center. Am I saying that right? I always get it wrong. But anyways, you can find it online if you type in WRIISC. And it's kind of a special unit in the VA that it's kind of like the Mayo. Like we would get some of the worst cases. I was there for 3 years. And one of the consistencies and what I prescribe for people that have some of the worst PTSD is some type of mind-body exercise, which is actually another form of meditation, like yoga or Pilates, in which they learn how to do belly breathing, because that's part of meditation, moving the breath through the body. And, would encourage them to do meditation, just straightforward meditation. When people are traumatized, a lot of times they're not able to do meditation for a period of time in the beginning. So they may have to do other forms of less traditional meditation, like the mind body exercise, to get them to learn how to breathe first. Yeah. So moving the breath through the body is like, that's one of the major tenets of meditation.
That's wonderful. And as you were sharing with me and with others who will listen to this, watch this video, I felt it. I felt the meditative state that one can experience as you were just speaking. Tai Chi, I'm sure you would agree, would be another one. Just to do a Tai Chi movement for me is like, whoa,
it is.
Yeah. Okay, so
all the martial arts are. All the martial arts evolved from Qigong, which / Tai Chi. Like they're kind of related. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, and you also, your number two was food. Now, in another place, I think I've read something where you stated, I'm quoting you, correct me if I'm wrong, that food is medicine.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
Yeah, so real food comes from the earth. And actually I was debating whether, but I decided to leave the order of what I stated the way that I stated, because connecting to the earth is super important. There are ions that come from the earth that help our bodies to heal. And getting grounded or getting connected to the earth directly, whether that's like your feet on the ground, or whether you're eating food from the earth, or drinking water from the earth, or breathing the air, clean air, we're getting all that from the earth. And movement is also connecting us to the earth. And think about how, like in Paleolithic times, their feet were on the bare ground. Yeah, so food has specific energy encoded in it. And when we're sick, our energy and frequency is really low. It's not where it's supposed to be. So getting like they call them polyphenols, the chemicals from food that cause a food to be different colors, getting the essential oils from the food that are naturally in the food also help to increase our frequency. Drinking clean water that is oxygenated and has the proper charge and the proper pH also helps to increase our frequency, right? So everything is frequency. We're trying to elevate our frequency to get out of illness.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I'm feeling a medicinal quality of you. And I'm not just saying that. There's something, because one can draw from another human being. I don't know what it is. It could be energetic. And I feel that.
Energetic.
I feel that coming from you as you speak about this. And something, you mentioned the earth. Our food comes from the earth. And growing up as a boy, we were bare feet a lot. And many of us were healthy, healthier than many children are today, just being bare feet. So occasionally now I wonder, should I just go outside without my shoes, just plant my feet on the ground,
Yes, you should. You can also bring grounding inside the home. So there, like if you look up earthing, there are kits that you can buy that plug into, the plugs are grounded. So that third hole is a grounding. So they have kits where you can plug into that you can put a blanket on your bed, that you can put a mat under your feet when you're sitting. You can put a mat, under your arms when you're working on a computer. So those can help you to get the negative ions too. But like standing out there on the bare ground is the best. That's the best.
Yeah. Well, from what you said, you're already giving us our 3, movement. You've talked a little bit about that, but I'll give you an opportunity to say more. So we have spiritual, food, and also movement.
Yep. So, and we mentioned movement already a little bit, but the mind body types of exercises that we mentioned, like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, Qigong, these methods help to move the energy through the body in a certain way. It's a healing way. So,
Well, you've inspired me. I'm going to raise the bar a little bit in terms of my movements. I like spinning on my stationary bike because it gives me stability, but I'm going to start doing a little more Tai Chi and things like that with my arms. And so you've inspired me. Now, because of your background and because of what you've said about the spirit, not only human spirit, but just spiritual. We're in this spiritual dimension. We're connected to our source, and our source is connected to us. And you've talked about trauma, and I know that you care about mental health and all of those kinds of things. So I'm going to raise a question that perhaps you've never been asked before, and that I rarely talk with anyone about because I just don't feel comfortable in just raising this question with anyone. And I grew up in South Carolina. I was born in 1954, so you know that I'm a person of a certain generation. My father was born in 1920. My mother was born around 1930. And of course, his father was born in the late 19th century. And, then the connection to American slavery and those kinds of things. And I've wondered about this. And you're the person that I have to ask. Because no one has ever talked with me, and I could not have talked to my children about that energy and how, I don't know. What I'm asking you is this. Are there bad mental habits? Are there bad emotional things that the children of Africa who were acculturated in America carried with them over time?
So, I always, I'm on several forums online talking about PTSS, which is post-traumatic slave syndrome. And Joy DeGruy coined the phrase and has a book and a workbook that you can order online. And she talks about the symptoms and the signs of it. And I agree with her work. And we also talk about epigenetics. So the example that people always talk about is the Holocaust. And I think that that's because in this country, people feel more comfortable talking about that than they do talking about slavery. But we really need to have open discussions about slavery. And to my dismay, up until I checked recently, the DSM manual of psychological and psychiatric illness is like a diagnostic manual. Mentioned generational stress or it's like a generational distress from the Holocaust as a diagnosis, and also for the same type of thing for Native Americans. But it does not mention Black people in that manual. And we have got to do something about that, because diagnoses that are in that manual are then used to justify insurance companies paying for the treatment. Now, doctors are, doing what they can. The ones that are more informed will try to use like anxiety or depression or things like that when seeing African Americans that are having symptoms of this. But then also there's been a brainwashing in this country that slavery did not leave an imprint of behavioral disturbances, which is not true. And we talked about epigenetics, and we know that stress is a part of epigenetics and generational stress. That's what I was trying to think of, that word. Generational stress is what they call it from the Holocaust and for Native Americans. But that's also what's going on with us. And they talk about, various scholars in the past have talked about that they believe, and also people that do energy medicine, believe that it takes 7 generations. If nothing is done, no treatment is given, it takes 7 generations for that generational stress to resolve. Okay. What we know and what we've seen, Black people have more diseases than everybody else. And, people are like, oh, well, it's self-control, it's this, is that, it's blame it on the victim, right? But no one has given credit or acknowledged that our people went through severe trauma. Okay. And that doesn't just disappear. It doesn't matter what your mindset is. And one of the very common manifestations is hypertension, is diabetes, and insulin resistance. And insulin resistance leads to more cancer. They're doing studies right now, but a lot of studies are coming out recently that most cancer is due to insulin resistance. And what that means is we're taking in too many carbohydrates, and that's everybody in this country is taking in too many carbohydrates in proportion to the other nutrients that we consume. And our cells are just bombarded with simple sugars and processed carbs and can't handle all that. The liver has to do something with that, all that carbohydrate. It typically makes fat. The fatty liver contributes to high cholesterol, contributes to hypertension, contributes to heart disease, contributes to stroke, I could go on and on. Cancer, almost every disease you think of, it's inflammation from insulin resistance. So, and insulin resistance is worsened by stress. We know that already. So if you have generational stress, you're going to have more diseases, right? Right.
Yeah.
And there's no pill for that.
That's right. Yeah. And that's why, as I said, I rarely talk about this, but there's something about you, I just felt comfortable. And now people who watch this video will hear me, what? I didn't know he would talk about something like that, But you know something though, we have already talked about some of the things that can be done for the kind of trauma associated with American slavery. And one is, recognizing your spiritual health, taking better care of the body, organism, and of course, better care, better foods, movement, and those kinds of things. And I don't know, but Joe, I'll ask you, I would love to have more conversations about that, because I'm gonna make another statement. Tell me if I'm making an assumption. And if I am, I'll drop it. But it seems that a lot of conversations are about, I'm going to call it the foreign God. It's a foreign God that we talk about. And this God is what we look to do this for me. And I'm wondering, maybe that's enough. I don't know. And it doesn't matter to me. But maybe I'm thinking, well, maybe if we can learn more about the God that Jesus talked about, one that never leaves, never forsakes. I wonder if that would empower the one who might feel, gosh, that experience was oppressive. I don't know. Maybe I'm lost in my question. I don't know.
Because the God that's outside of the person is manipulating, or the person is subject to, right? Whereas, like you mentioned the word empower, because when you were talking about it, I was thinking the God or the divine within yourself is the empowering one.
Yes.
Because then you have control over your destiny, right?
Yes, that's for sure. And that's the one, when I think of that, that's when I feel loved and cared for and protected. When I can discover it, that God right here. But anyway, perhaps at another time we could go, because there's so many other things. I've been talking to some other doctors, and we may do a Zoom summit that deals with health.
That'd be great.
No, so Dr. Satcher, is there anything else that you care to share with us before you leave?
Well, I was just thinking, what was running through my mind was that I did not say that PTSS, or post-traumatic slave syndrome, has a lot in common with PTSD. So when you look at Joy DeGruy's description, a lot of it is basically like PTSD, but it's ongoing over years and years and decades, instead of PTSD kind of has a shorter life as a disease, and can be almost completely resolved with therapies. And PTSS can be resolved too, but the problem is that we keep getting assaulted. So we turn on the TV and someone Black has gotten killed by a police or someone else for no reason, was unarmed and didn't, do anything to get killed. That's traumatizing to us every day. Microaggressions are traumatizing. And we just get used to dealing with them. But if we were actually monitoring our blood pressure, our heart rate, we would see, and also our autonomic nervous system response, we would see that we're having responses to these microaggressions.
Yeah, and and we don't really talk about it from the perspective. Well, we rarely talk about it from the perspective of empowering, because I think there are some things that I'm looking at about the past. How does a person deal with this so-called past from a perspective that's empowering? So those are conversations that I hope to have with people like yourself in the future. So thank you so much for being with us today. And we're looking forward to having you at another time. And I think your YouTube channel, Dr. Satcher, I have it here, is, I don't have it. What is it?
Treat Yourself to Health.
Treat Yourself to Health. You'll find her on YouTube and other places on the internet. My name is Stephen Middleton. I'm your host of the Possibility Action Network podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, good day